Okay, we are rolling. All right, so today I am speaking with Edward. Edward, thank you for participating. Would you please take a moment, maybe just introduce yourself, tell us something about who you are, your background?
Okay, well, just real fast, I grew up on the coast of California, Central Coast, Santa Cruz, and I don't know, I guess I was just like kind of a skater kid when I was in high school, and then um, hung out for a couple of years, did a little traveling in Central America, and then I went to college. After college, it was a little bit hard for me to find um, work, but I did like substitute teaching, like local high schools and stuff like that. And then I went off and taught abroad in Colombia, and that was a good experience. Mostly like high school kids um, and like early college kids and stuff. And I found that really rewarding. They seem to show a lot more respect towards like teachers and stuff than I got as like a substitute teacher, definitely.
So you've
And
taught in California, Colombia, and China.
correct.
Wow.
Yep. And so yeah, I found that rewarding, and I only did that for about 6 months, and then I came home, and I wasn't sure what to do, but I didn't really like the substitute teaching that much, so I was kind of looking for a job, and then my neighbor, who is Chinese, said that I could get a job in China, and I'd always been a little bit curious about China, and I thought if I don't go now, then I won't get a chance, maybe. And so I took her up on it, and I went.
So what year did you go to China?
I went to China in the beginning of 2015,
Okay.
so about February 2015, and I went to
And yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I went to Hangzhou.
Hangzhou, that's on the East Coast, right?
Yeah, it's about an hour and a half south of Shanghai by high speed train.
Okay. Did you like Hangzhou? Is it a nice city? A lot of people
It's a
seem to
really,
like it.
really beautiful city. It's a really special city. It's almost like the Silicon Valley of China. It's where like Alibaba and stuff is based, and it's a really nice environment and stuff like that. So yeah, I did like it a lot.
So how long were you there? A year, 2 years?
I was there for a year and a half.
Okay, year and a half. So let's see. I think that covers first couple questions. So what were some things that surprised you when you first arrived? Maybe, your first week, your first month, your first few months. What things about Chinese culture and maybe the schools, the education surprised you?
Well, it's hard to say, but and it sounds dumb to say, but seeing all the signs, um, it sounds really dumb, but seeing all the signs with the Chinese characters and stuff was a little bit of a shock at first because even though I had been to other countries and stuff, it was still in like the English alphabet, in Colombia and like Costa Rica and stuff like that. But in China, obviously, all the signs were in Chinese and stuff for most of them.
Uh-huh.
So that kind of struck me as weird. And some of the markets and stuff, like, um, I don't know, you'd see like squid and stuff like dangling or like a cow chopped in half the long way or whatever. So
Sure.
um, there's things like that I had never really seen before, and um, I guess that's mostly it. Nothing like jumped out too extremely besides that, but I remember being struck by the Chinese characters all over the place. I guess one thing that did sort of surprise me was the lights from above, because like when you're flying above like the United States, all the lights are sort of like pale yellow and stuff. But all of a sudden, when I flew over Asia, the city lights were all like purple and greens and oranges and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
That was kind of cool.
Yeah, they use a lot of colorful neon lights in China, no doubt.
Yeah, the cities are all new. It seems like
Yeah.
that was cool.
Was there anything? So your first day or your first week in class, or just reflecting on the whole experience, What were some things maybe you noticed that maybe surprised you or were different about a Chinese classroom from an American or a Colombian classroom?
Well, one of the main differences that I noticed, at least from public schools in the U.S., was in China, the parents gave a lot of support to the teachers and like really liked and sort of seemed to respect the teachers and respect me. And they were like very happy I was there and very happy that I was like helping to teach their kids and stuff. And so I felt like really well appreciated and almost respected and stuff. And that was a good feeling. It's different than being a substitute teacher in the US.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it was mostly positive in that regard then.
Yeah, I'd say it was very positive.
Okay,
Maybe
good.
there's a little bit more work, and then maybe they like the school expected more work because it's kind of for profit. But I was kind of like I was willing to accept it.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So now I want to touch on some of the sort of maybe a little bit more abstract components of Chinese culture, and you know maybe you're not like a total expert in these fields or
No,
these
not.
domains, but that's all right. Just
Yeah.
whatever you know you might know or you think you might have picked up while you were there.
Hmm.
Still curious. What is your understanding? I'm sure you encountered. Most people encounter in China this whole concept of face and gaining face and saving face and losing face, and it's a really big part of Chinese culture. What's sort of your understanding about that? Did you have any experiences with that, or did it ever come up in conversation, or just what do you know about this concept of face?
Yeah, it rarely came up in conversation, and you're right. It is extremely important in terms of Chinese culture. Uh, Most important to know for laymen or whatever, if they don't know, is uh, it's most important to like never ever embarrass host or especially a guy in China. And so, like, if someone says something you disagree with or something, then just don't make a big deal out of it. And I think that's one of the one mistake I definitely made at first when I went to China. I didn't do it with a guy, luckily, but like I remember, um, like some of the girls I was around and stuff. Like I'd be like eating, I don't know, squid or something, and I'd like I'd like spit like a fish bone out or something, and I thought I was doing it like they were, and they'd like look at me and like point and stuff like that, and that kind of annoyed me. And then it was like my first or second week there, and they kept doing it. Oh, look at Edward, and then I was like, God, don't like point at me like I'm a little monkey or something. What I'm trying to food. And that was definitely a mistake on my part. I should
They
not.
do that a lot though in China, and sometimes it gets on my nerves a bit. That's something I would tell new teachers. If you go to China and you're not Chinese, especially if you look like probably you or me,
Yeah,
you get a lot of unwanted attention. You get stared at, you get pointed at. People will take
yeah.
your photo,
Uh-huh.
and it's like nonstop sometimes.
Yeah, that's some advice I'd give to myself and also to anyone else going to China is you have to just learn to not take yourself so seriously. If
Yeah.
someone's gonna point at you and laugh or something, you got. I think it's better to just go along and laugh along with it and say, okay, it's just how I eat or whatever. But but instead I was like, God, don't point at me. And it made it a lot worse. So
Uh-huh.
I would give advice to new people going to China: don't take yourself so seriously, and most of all, don't embarrass anyone
Yeah. Yeah. It's good
unless it's like a
advice.
close one. I mean, you could like tease and play with people, but like don't be serious and actually embarrass anyone.
Sure.
That's
Sure.
one of the important things, I think.
Um, so would you say, I think this is an easy one, but would you say China's a individualistic culture or a collectivistic culture?
Yeah, I would say it's collectivistic and that it's sort of all for the same good. That's sort of another thing I found a little bit surprising is that one example is like a friend of mine, someone who worked at the school, like married someone, and they like really didn't like their husband or something that much, and I was like, well, maybe you should get divorced or something. Like, oh no, I could never do that. My family would be really upset with that if I did that. Whereas like for most Americans, if you married someone and you didn't like them, but your family did, you would be tempted to get divorced. But in China, they're like, no, 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 I could never do that to my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that a little odd, but that is how it is there. The the group is kind of more important than the individual.
Yeah, definitely. Now, did you ever get the sense that maybe?
And maybe that's related to
Yeah, go ahead.
maybe yeah, maybe that's a little bit related to the saving face and stuff. That like if somebody does something that annoys you, then you just have to sort of go along with it and um, keep the harmony among the group.
Yeah,
It's more important than your own feelings.
and social harmony and harmonious society are phrases that from my experience, come up kind of often. People always say harmonious society,
They come
and
up pretty often, and it's like I read in the news and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, well, we have to like keep dissent and protests and stuff like that down because we're a peaceful and harmonious society." And like, I thought that was all like lip service, and it sort of was, but actually, from living in China and like walking around parks at night, it actually was pretty harmonious and peaceful. I'm like, this is actually pretty nice. So, um,
yeah,
when
yeah,
they
it is
say
safe. It
that,
is.
there's some sort of truth to it, where they they actually are trying to maintain a peaceful and harmonious society, and it's kind of nice that they don't have like gangs running around at night or anything like that. So there's actually a good element.
Hello, I think I lost you. Oh,
I'm
there you
still
are.
here. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I think it dropped for like 2 seconds. All right, good.
Mm.
Um, I also think, and a lot of people bring that up with like, in terms of the family unit and being part of a nation and a family and all that. But I also think they're very compared to like Americans, for example, they're very collective in like thought and ideology and things like that. They have a lot in common with like their thinking and slogans. From my experience, versus America, you'll have different groups and more people more willing to disagree, publicly.
Yeah.
But I found a lot in China. If I would ask questions to students, sometimes I would get identical or very similar responses. Did you have any
Yeah.
experiences like that?
Yeah, I did. Um, I, I would get a little bit sort of almost annoyed because I would get the same response, and um, I can't. I don't know if I can think of an example, but I would get sort of the same response. Like I would say, like oh yeah, I was reading about like the Song Dynasty. You know about them? And then someone would be like, oh yeah, yeah, we're very proud of the Song Dynasty. China has a long 5,000 year history, and I was like, yeah, yeah, they like invented this steel and stuff, and I'm like, and I'm like, they invented cannons and stuff, and I've tried to go into like specifics, and then they'd be like, no, no, no cannons, but we have 5,000 years of history. I'm like, yeah, yeah, I know you have 5,000 years of history, but do you know anything else about the Song Dynasty? And they're like, no, no, but we have a long continuous history in China, and then I'd like go to someone else and I'd be like, hey, have you ever heard about the Song Dynasty? And they're like, yeah, we have a 5,000 year history in China. I'm like, God, I know you. I like
Yeah,
go to like a third person. I'm like, hey, have you ever heard about like the Song Dynasty or Southern Song Dynasty? Yeah, 5,000 years of history. It's like,
yeah.
God, you guys like told to remember like the same phrase.
Right, right. They have like these stock sort of phrases and slogans that
Mm-hmm.
they sort of pull from their bag, and yeah, as an American or a teacher, it can be kind of frustrating sometimes, or
Mm-hmm.
just kind of dull. And obviously, politics in China, it's kind of taboo. You can't really talk about it a whole lot. But as
Yeah.
an example, I think you'll agree. You could be almost anywhere in America. You could be in a very liberal or a very conservative place or school. But if you were to ask students, or if you were to go around America and do a poll or whatever and say, what do you think of the current president, whether it's Trump or Obama or Bush or Clinton? Some people are going to support. Some people are going to say, I don't like the president. you're going to
Yeah.
get a range. And then some people might be like, well, I'm indifferent. I don't really care who's president. You might get some sort
Uh-huh.
of range. Whereas in
Uh-huh.
China, everybody's going to say, oh, I love the president. He's great. He's glorious, wonderful, dear leader.
He pays for his own lunch with his own money. He buys his own
What?
one.
But would you
It's like,
agree with that? Like there would be, again, like just
yeah,
sort
I
of
would.
a uniformity in response and
I've never heard a Chinese person say they don't like their president.
right, right. And in America, no matter who is president, and I think it's good in a way that
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
everybody's and I suspect that some people don't like the Chinese leadership, but they're just not going to say it publicly. But I do think
Yeah.
school students, younger ones,
Mm.
they're going to be more sincere and they're going to be less maybe cynical than maybe an older person.
Yeah.
But yeah, I throughout my time in China, I've been going there off and on since 2003. So I've spent quite a bit of time there and in different cities. I would so often, not always, sometimes you have an anomaly or someone stands out, but very often get very, very similar responses. Again, there are exceptions, but in general, that does seem to be the norm. So that's face, that's collectivism. What do you know about Confucianism? I realize not everyone who goes to China for a year or two becomes a Confucian scholar, but do you know anything about it? Do you ever read about it? Do you know what it's all about?
Yeah. Well, it's sort of one of those things that people can have their own different takes on it. So it's like, hold on one second, my dad's calling for me. Yeah,
Okay.
Pop, I'm on a sort of conference call. It's for something. What do you want?
You don't have any chocolate you can spare, do
Um,
you?
just
Done?
yeah, just in a little while. Anyway, so yeah, about Confucianism.
Uh-huh.
I have read a little bit about that. I know a little bit about that. I know some of his quotes, things like everything has its beauty, but not everyone sees it. That's one of his favorite. One of his quotes is a favorite. But I think it's sort of like one of those things that like it's almost like Christianity, where people can take that belief system and make it into sort of anything to fit their own like ideology. So like people who are very liberal
Yeah.
might like take the liberal aspects of Christianity and say it's Christianity, and people who are super conservative can take Christianity and use it to justify their own like viewpoint on that. And that
Yeah.
happens I think, with
People.
Confucianism. People who want like radical change will cite Confucius, and people who want like super conservative values will also cite Confucius. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but
People
yeah,
can
he was
can
an
cherry
important
pick.
he's an important scholar. What's something you like about Confucius? Maybe you could
Oh
springboard
man,
from
to be honest, I was talking with another guy yesterday, and he's studied world religions and philosophies and stuff.
mm-hmm.
I've always found Confucius a bit dry and dull. I've read about him over the years. I've read some of his sayings, and I've just never found him that interesting. I think he's very like practical. He talks about again harmony and
Mm-hmm.
relationships and authority, and you can see that in the culture, you can see that in the
Mm-hmm.
education system. But I've always
Yeah.
found him a bit dull compared to someone like Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, and that's a lot more
Mm-hmm.
mystical and metaphysical.
Yeah.
But I'm more interested in things like that, the more abstract stuff. Or if you look at a lot of Western philosophy, I like
Mm-hmm.
Plato and Socrates or
Yeah.
Nietzsche. You and we've talked about Nietzsche.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff I can get into because I feel like it's thought provoking,
Mm-hmm.
and I think again that's a more Western inclination. We want to have thought provoked. We don't want to have rote memorization. We want to have discussions about interesting ideas. And I don't
Yeah.
think Confucius really does that. Now, again, I'm not saying there's no benefits. I'm not saying he doesn't have any good ideas. I just find it's kind of like, well, here's a system and you should accept it and it works good. And people say, okay. And that's not a terrible thing. I just find it kind of boring.
Well, he has some good quotes. He has things like before you seek out on a journey to seek revenge, dig 2 graves.
That's a good one.
I like that. And I don't know, he has some. I guess China was kind of torn apart at the time over like Civil War
Warring
and stuff,
states.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it had been bad, and then so he kind of sat down and was like, "How have we gotten so off the right path, and how can we get back onto it?" And his solution was like the family and like no radical change and stuff. So
Yeah.
he was kind of like the John Locke of China.
Okay. So I do get the sense then that yeah, you do have some understanding of face collectivism, Confucianism. So how would you say they maybe influence or manifest in a Chinese school from what you experienced or observed? Were there any like just I don't know, did you ever get instances or have memories where you felt like, oh, this behavior could be related to Confucian values, or this could be related to face, or this could be related to collectivism? Any ideas?
Yeah, well, everything was part of the group. It wasn't, I guess, when you're working a job in America, you're just a random guy. And then when your 8-hour shift is done, you go home and that's fine. That's it. On the weekend, you're also free. But in China, there was no like clocking out at 5 o'clock or anything like that, really. It was, especially at first, it was like we were getting the school going, and it was like I just had to be at the school whenever I was called, basically. And if it was going to be a 14-hour day, then that's the way it went. And it got easier later on. But I remember we would have we'd have like 2 days off. It would be like our weekend on like Monday and Tuesday. And what did they call it? That once a month we would have like a fun day or a group day. I forgot what they called it.
Huh.
But basically it was like a fun day, but it wasn't really fun. And like everyone from the work had to like go to the mall or like go to a disco or
Oh, we
whatever.
would call that in the military. We would call that mandatory fun.
Yeah, it was mandatory fun. It was like, oh, what did they call it? I forgot the exact name, but it was like after like 5 days of work, it'd be like 2 days off, and they're like, oh, but this week it's a fun day, so we're gonna get together at the mall on Tuesday. I'm like, oh no.
Oh,
And
not a fun day.
yeah, we go play tag, or we'd go play paintball or climb a wall or something.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I
and it was all part of the group. It was all, at least I had my own apartment and stuff, but there was no, yeah, it was, and in some ways it was kind of nice because they did sort of care about how I was feeling and stuff. Like if I was like sad or depressed or something, then that would affect the whole school, and so like they cared a lot more than a normal employer in the U.S. would care. But yeah, no, we definitely sort of did things as a group and stuff.
Okay.
More often. Mm-hmm.
Now, I forgot to ask. I should have asked this earlier, but I want to get it on the record. What kind of school were you working for? An international school, a high school, a kindergarten, a university?
Well, it was a private school. I don't know if I want to get all the details out there, but
You don't
I
have
was
to.
working for
Yeah.
a private school. Do you want me to say? Yeah, I was just working for a private school for little kids, between the ages of about 5 to 11, I'd say.
Okay.
But mostly they're younger. Mostly they're like 6 and stuff. And
Okay.
and so yeah, I don't know. I was working at the school, and mostly I was focusing on like English grammar and games and stuff. And it was important to like keep the kids like happy and entertained because the parents are paying pretty good money to have their kids sent to the school where there was an English foreign teacher and stuff like that.
Right. And I've come across the phrase more than once over the years, edutainment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a little bit of a fine balance because I didn't want the kids to get bored. If they got bored, then it would really be bad. But I also wanted to teach them as much as possible. And that's kind of a fine balancing act, because games that some classes find really entertaining, other classes find boring. So you have to sort of tailor it to the specific class. And
Right.
that's another bit of advice I'd give foreign English teachers, is to look up a lot of games in your arsenal, have a lot of games ready to go, be ready to mix it up, be ready to change games quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this kind of, you're already kind of segueing into the next question. I think I would say I want to ask is what are some obstacles that you encountered as a teacher, and how do you feel like you overcame those obstacles?
Oh, that's tough. I guess I would say is that all the classes were really different, even though they'd be the same grades and stuff. Like I would play like that game Telephone, where you whisper into a person's ear one phrase, and then they whisper and they whisper, and then you see what it is at the end. I would play that game with like one class, and they just love it, and it was like really fun. They wanted to play it more, and then like literally the next class, same age group, try to play Telephone, and they just wouldn't get it. They wouldn't like it, and so I had to have a lot of games ready to go. Or even if I had a lot of games, sorry, a minute, chairs creaking. Even if I had a lot of games, sometimes they would still get bored. Like I had to have like 5 games ready to go, and they
Yeah.
might really get tired of all 5 games. And so even in China, I had to be prepared to like search for and find new games. And,
Right.
And I did do that, but it was something I had to do.
Sure. Yeah, and since September 2019, I started working for a middle school and high school, and yeah, I use more games with them than I would with like university. But even university, they like to play games. So sometimes with university, I would play Jeopardy or a trivia game or something like that. But yeah, Chinese people love games when they have a foreign teacher. And I feel like that's kind of a major difference between like a Chinese classroom and like an American classroom is, when I grew up in school, yeah, sometimes we would play games, but we didn't have this expectation. And in Chinese classrooms, often they do. I feel like, Americans, we like sports, we like games, we like computer games, all kinds of stuff. Everyone likes games. But I feel like in America, there's sometimes more of this attitude that, it's not always going to be fun. Like we're here to study or to learn. And Chinese now, with their Chinese teachers, I think it's like that. But with foreign teachers, I do feel like they feel more entitled to be entertained or have fun.
Yeah, maybe.
So what would you say are, again, you've taught in America and China, what would you say are maybe some of the differences between a Chinese classroom and a what? Now, again, if you're teaching kids in China and high school students in America, there's some differences in age, but were there any things maybe culture-wise that you detected were different?
Well, like I said, one of the main differences that I appreciated was the parents gave me a lot of support and seemed to appreciate me and stuff, and I was really thankful for that. And I think maybe in America there's like more of a sense of punishment or something on both ends, or like if a teacher messes up, they could be punished worse, and also like students can be punished worse. I remember in America the students can be punished worse. One of my TAs when I was in China was like, Edward, is it true that in America, if a kid misbehaves, they could be sent outside the classroom? And I was like, yeah, we can send them outside all the time. It's common in America. They're like, God, that's terrible. But I guess that was one cultural difference. And I don't know. I don't know. There were sometimes the kids I was around would play games with like guns and stuff and like point guns at each other, like in the classroom and point it outside and stuff. That wouldn't really happen in America these days.
Oh, right,
Find
right.
that little,
I think some students have been suspended for stuff like that,
yeah, you might be.
which is ironic in a way because in China you can't own guns, but in America you can.
Yeah, America barely mentioned guns in the classroom.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
In China, I will say, they've got some problems, I think, but they don't ever have mass shooters at high schools or anything
No,
like
they don't
that.
have mass shooters, but they have mass slashers. That was a problem. There was some crazy people that would actually go into like kindergartens and stuff and like start slashing people. It's terrible. It was something that was on my mind because there was a couple incidents of that actually happening.
Yeah, you're right. I do think of one or two. I guess I'm not sure how common it is, but yeah, that is a good point. I did forget about that. So yeah, fair point.
Like 2 or 3 times,
Mm.
like in the year I was there.
Yeah, that's also pretty horrible.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't want to dwell on that too much.
Yeah.
So now here's the next question. You kind of answered a little bit already, but if you have anything additional, the next question is, what were some useful strategies you developed while teaching in China? You mentioned games, have games prepared. Anything else?
Well, is it a question about teaching in China or being in China?
I would say, well, the question, the way I worded it is, what were some useful strategies you developed while teaching in China? So I'm thinking more specifically in terms of teaching, but if you want to talk about just living in general, that's also fine.
Well, for living in general, I found, and maybe this shouldn't be so obvious, but or maybe it should be more obvious, is that just saying anything good about China always went over really well, and saying anything at all critical of China went over very badly. So, yeah, anyone traveling to China or whatever, even if it's like constructive criticism or like a question about why is it this way, there's a thing where like Chinese have like glass hearts, and it can be perceived to be like very negative, even if it's not so negative. Like I talked about this with Rod, that like, or Rob, that when I first went to China, I tried to like, I paid for something at like a grocery store, and then somebody, they put the money like on the counter and made me pick up the money, and I was like, okay, fine. And then I went somewhere else, and I like put my hand out this time, and they put the money on the counter again and made me pick it up. And then I went back to my friends at the school, and I was like, let me ask you a question. What's up with the people like putting the money on the counter and like making me pick it up? Is that like common here or something? And they kind of like took that as a big offense. Like, no, Chinese people are like very welcoming and like are kind to strangers, and we always are like polite, and we always like put it in people's hands and stuff like that. And they got like defensive about their country. And I'm not trying to go there. I was just asking about that specific grocery store or whatever. So yeah, if you're in China and you want to be popular, just say a lot of good things about China. Just when people, I mean, don't be like fake about it, but like you'll almost never go wrong by saying something good about China. So
and they can be incredibly hypersensitive, where they take offense and it's not even intended. Like I remember,
much so, yeah.
I remember I have one example. This is from maybe 2018. I was in Beijing teaching university, and there was a student who I liked, and he had a good sense of humor, and he and I would sometimes like kind of joke around in class a little bit, because I like to have rapport. I like to have like a relaxed environment, and he was wearing sort of like, I don't know, like what dynasty or whatever it might be from, but he had like some little traditional cap he was wearing, and he wore it to class one day. And as I took roll, I noticed it, and I said, "Oh, I like your cap." And he was like, "Oh, thank you, teacher." And I said, "Yeah, it reminds me of like those Chinese TV shows I see where where the men have the long ponytail, you know, the long
Yeah, yeah,
queue.
yeah.
And
And they
because
get
you
very
see it on,
defensive.
and then he was okay with it, but then I
Uh-huh.
had a female student, and she was a little bit eccentric. She was a little bit
Mhm.
weird, but
Mhm.
she like sent me this long message on WeChat, like saying it
Mhm.
was disrespectful and how dare I bring it up. And I was thinking, what are you
Yeah, yeah,
talking about? I just made an observation about his hat, and then I'm talking, and she's like, no, that was like, you know, the China's period of humiliation when they wear the
yeah, yeah,
ponytail. And
yeah.
I found it weird because they put it on TV, like it's
Yeah,
in
yeah,
like
yeah,
their dramas, and I wasn't criticizing, I was
yeah,
complimenting his hat, but no, she was really mad about it.
yeah. I totally know what you're talking about. I remember even before I went to China. Um, what was that app? I forget where you could like Quora, where you could like ask questions. It used to
Yeah,
be like common and popular in China. You could ask like questions, and uh, so you'd like say your interest or something you know about, and then people could ask questions, and then people could like respond to those answers,
uh-huh.
and people would like ask or tell like a very neutral question like about the Korean War or something, like what was the like most effective tank in the Korean War, and someone would respond like most of the tanks in the Korean War were effective, but the Chinese tanks got stuck in the snow and were not prepared for winter combat. And like there'd be like 100 comments, like the Chinese people will like rise up against the imperialists who try to humiliate us for no reason. It's like this is a question about armor. It's
Right,
like completely neutral. Or I mean, it's not completely
right,
neutral. It's not in any way like critical of China. It's talking about like tanks and what kind of armor was effective during the Korean War. But they get like very, very defensive. Like, you people are always attacking China, but you're gonna find out the truth and stuff. And I was
right.
kind of baffled by those kind of responses. And then I encountered more of
When,
those responses when I went to
um,
yeah. And I could think of one thing you said reminded me about that in the classroom. This wasn't in the classroom, but when I first went to China, I had been kind of interested in like collecting stamps, and so I asked like a friend. I was like, "You guys have like stamp